Would they get
Committee member Chu,
here?
committee member Holmes,
Here.
committee member Hull. Here. Committee member Levinson,
Here.
committee member Popovich,
Here.
committee member Slot. Here. Committee member Teed,
Here.
committee member Sang. Here. Committee member McClure. No, committee member McClure is absent.
Okay, great, thank you. You have a review of the minutes for December 6th. Any comments about the minutes, any changes that need to be made? December 5th. Says December 5th.
You shouldn't say.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I say 5th?
You should.
December 5th, I can correct it. Are there any changes to the minutes that anybody sees need to be done? If not going to have a motion to approve the minutes.
I vote.
Second. Moved and seconded, all those in favor? Opposed? Good. Moving on to number 3, adding measure G to the Oversight Committee's responsibility. Over to our.
Yeah, it's, so as everyone knows, Measure B passed in November and takes effect in April. And has the same language that Measure B has for the appointment of an oversight committee. Staff suggested to the council that we have a pretty strong oversight committee for B, and the roles seem fairly compatible. The measures are very similar in the way they're structured. And so we thought, so that we're just one meeting of an oversight committee rather than 2, that we'd ask if you were amenable to be the committee. To make it work, we've had the council appoint you pending your acceptance. So if you reject it, then we'll have to go find a Measure B committee. But if you accept it, you will serve in the dual role of one committees and be renamed the Sales Tax Citizens Oversight.
Can you remind us of how long Measure G goes for, the 5-year?
So both these measures are until the voters rescind them, which would require the voters to do an initiative or the council or put the matter on the ballot. One of the things the measure says is that the oversight committee can certainly recommend to the council that the need for the measure no longer exists and that it should be placed on the ballot to be rescinded. That's implied in the actual language of the ordinance adopted. Measure D, unlike Measure B, would be subject to a statewide ballot initiative that's qualified for the November 2024 ballot, which may necessitate either going to the voters for a revised language or allowing it to be rescinded by the state proposition, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. That's a pretty detailed discussion for a different day.
So one of the things I had a problem with on this, $700,000 a year generates. And yet there's tens of millions of dollars of work that needs to be done. So do I sense financing involved here? Bonds or anything?
No, we've talked with the council about storm drains for off and on for the last couple of years. They don't lend themselves to the same type of program that the roads did because of the nature of how they get repaired. And the fact that it's less uniform. I could have Julian Bordy for a while if you want. He will be in the future doing full-blown storm drain presentations to the oversight committee, but the summary is it's more of a pay-as-you-go approach. If there was ever any debt financing, it'd be small scale stuff to accelerate like a purchase of something like the pump stations, for example, where we might have to go to a private borrow for a year or two just to get that work done. The thing is right now, Measure B is so far ahead of the projections we ever had for it that Measure B hopefully could complement Measure G, and the 2 of them could work together to do this program.
What is the arrangement for our terms of it?
Allison, I just figured that out today. You are all actually in the last year of your terms. So one of the things the council will be doing, they have a process where they reach out to incumbents, ask if they want to be reappointed. So at some point, probably in the next couple months,
Yes.
is when they do that.
Month or 2.
So you'll be hearing from, is it the
Mayor and vice mayor are the committees.
what Allison explained it. So then you'll be asked if you want to sit on the committee for another term, and if you say yes. I can't predict, but they usually appoint everybody who says yes, and then if you say no, we'll look for you.
Well, I don't have any I don't have any objection to serving on Measure G. I can envision the possibility of additional meetings. Don't have a sense of how much that would be needed. I mean, my impression is that Measure B meetings have generally been issues have generally occupied the entire space, but so I don't know whether it would work out that we would need multiple meetings or not, but I see it as a possibility. It's not a problem for me, but in any event,
I think that's a fair point, and you have the ability to call meetings when you need to. They would probably be because Julian would want to update you on something programmatic. But I do think later tonight, we'll talk briefly about, you may see the road presentation starting to be less detailed because we're transitioning from the full rehabilitation to the maintenance program. And there's going to be less of Julian explaining road by road how each one got repaired, and more about the annual program to just keep everything working.
Any other thoughts about taking on this additional responsibility?
Yes, I have some questions, and just thinking back to. What are we're measure, I always get this wrong, we're measure B now, so when we were measure C in the beginning, there was a lot of really detailed information that we got. Is it gonna be similar with storm drains if we took that on? There'd be a lot more information early on about the condition and the repairs needed and all of the work involved, and we were looking at, bids and bills and.
I think that for those who weren't on the committee when we were in the Measure C group, it was new to Larkspur. There wasn't a track record of having asked the voters to support anything like that. And it had a term limit. And so I think those things in combination, we wanted to build an oversight committee that could go out and discuss with the community whether we were going to renew Measure C, and if so, why. I think we haven't bombarded you with that level of detail on the Measure B committee because, well, a lot of you already heard it so many times. And then also, I think we started to hit our stride of having a program that everybody could follow and monitor better. I don't know about the storm drains. It's probably as much detail as you want the presentations to be. Unlike the roads, there's video, so you can see a video of these storm drains. And you can watch the little gadget travel through the storm drains if that excites you. You can probably do that on your own time if you want.
Yeah, question for staff. You're not asking us to review the projects, because I always thought that our role was to review whether the expenditures were in compliance with the tax measure.
So the only difference this oversight committee versus some of them is there are provisions in both ordinances that the city manager will bring his recommendations for how the money will be used. That's been done in the spring, and it's both G and B say that. So tonight you're looking at my recommendations for how to use the Measure B money. I like it's more you're my sounding board, right? So, and I think there was one year I did go and say we didn't have consensus between the staff and the committee, but usually we've adjusted our recommendations because your feedback to us is really valuable about what the community might be thinking.
I mean, I like going and being part of Measure G, because we're doing what we had set up with the, Measure B, as I was saying to Gemma earlier. We got to the point where you're just reviewing whether the expenditures for the debt service would be paid.
Right.
And now we can go back to looking at projects on a page.
I would hope that at the next meeting, we could do an orientation through sewers and the financing, so we can get a good grounding as to how it's all supposed to work.
Yeah, you have to.
Okay, that'd be great. Anybody else for a call for vote? Can I have a motion to approve? The move,
Second.
second. Any additional conversation? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I was an aye.
I realized I forgot to tell the committee you are our first low-tech Zoom meeting, because we've been trying to figure out one that requires less training and the full cameras. And I see that Councilmember Carroll has joined us to watch the meeting. But this is just our simple point and have it on, so if people want to watch the meeting, they can. It's a little intimidating to try to run the meetings with cameras if you don't know what you're doing. So we are on Zoom.
Okay, so we're on item 4, which is an update on project, which is always fun, because we get slides and we see progress and picture. Julia, I guess this is you.
Yep. Okay, so here's our spring 23 update. There's a couple of recent photos. The one on the right is Doherty Drive that was paved this summer, and then on the left, there's marking a crosswalk on Magnolia. And so just a reminder that we do try to incorporate pedestrian enhancements and bicycle enhancements when we're repaving these streets, and Magnolia is one example where we were able to enhance some crosswalks and add some bike lanes as part of the paving project. Here's the map, the progress map that we've been sharing with you. Everything in gray is completed. The yellow area there that's South Alicia, that's the current project. So on days when it's not raining and it's warm enough, at the moment, they're out there paving the whole length of South Alicia. And then down at the bottom left, you see those orange streets. Those were all programmed for this current paving project, but they're all on hold at the moment. The group of streets around Piedmont, we missed the February 1st nesting owl restriction window, so now we've got to wait till August. If we get favorable survey results back from Fish and Wildlife Department, we could start as early as May. But we've been told there's historically nesting owls in that area, so not to anticipate being able to start before August. And then Monte Vista, we ran into a shallow PG&E gas line. It's only about 9 inches down, and we were supposed to go down 8 inches and grind the street out. So we thought that was a little too close for comfort. So PG&E came out and had a look, and they're going to have to replace our gas line for the entirety of Monte Vista and coming up King Street. And so now we've got to wait for PG&E to program that. They've told us that's usually a 9 to 15 month process for them to replace a gas main. We have another meeting with them next week, and they're looking at ways to expedite that because we'd really like to be able to get it paved before next winter. That means we'll be able to keep it with our current contractor that we have on board now. We're able to lock in the pricing that we have from him with that bigger project. If we have to pull it out and then rebid it separately later by itself, it'll be more expensive because it's a smaller job. And then there's a couple of other little leftovers here. I've got a table that goes into them in more detail, but basically everything in a gray shadow here was done with Measure B. All of the single lines that are gray were done pre-Measure B, so Measure C for the most part.
Julian, is there a way to notify or update the people who were on that street who are not getting paved?
We actually have been on that street. We actually got the letter today.
Oh,
Came in the mail. So this is from Alvin.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So there's a letter that we send out at the beginning of the project, and we have the link to the Fixing Our Roads website on there because we update that on a weekly basis with the schedule because it always changes. But this being such a significant change, we did in addition send a letter out.
One question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
There was also somewhere on there, I noticed that for our roads, they said there's a Piedmont retaining wall. The $200,000 line item.
Yeah, on Piedmont Court, about 2/3 of the way up on the right, as you're driving up, there's a retaining wall there that's failed
Okay.
that we're going to replace. But we've been working with the geotech on that, and we don't need to dig into the street to fix it. So whatever whatever comes first will go, but obviously it can't also go until it's got the same owl restriction on it.
Julian, just quickly, I know this isn't part of the roads, but Piper Park's getting a makeover right now and all that.
Yes.
Is that gonna be repaved eventually, the parking lot and the road in?
So we did some patchwork on the entryway in and the worst of the puddles in the parking lot about a week or so ago. So if you haven't been there within the last week, we did go in there and do a patch on the road and the worst of the parking lot. But yes, once everything's finished in the park, there's still a lot of work. There's a lot of heavy construction work in the old dog park. We've got to turn that back into a marsh. So there'll be lots of dirt coming in and out. And so when that's all finished and we know there's no more construction traffic in there, we've already got our consultants looking at a design for repaving.
It's getting pretty rough in there.
Yeah,
Does that come out of Measure C funds?
not at the moment. It's not a funded project at the moment. We're just
Oh.
looking at the engineering and we'll have it evaluated and figure out what kind of dollars we're looking at.
I
But
think
it's-
retaining wall is that a Measure C fund item?
It is because of holding the street up.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Julian,
Yes.
are there nesting owls on the birch extension?
No, birch and skylark are still, I didn't mention those because they're hard to see on here because they're so small. But I've got them listed in the table. Those are streets that we've deemed, even though they haven't been paved within the last 5 years, they don't need any, there's no point in putting a treatment on them now. We'd be taking up decent asphalt and replacing with slightly better asphalt. Those streets are much better aligned with what we'll be moving forward with our streets we paved over the last 10 years, and that's a slurry seal or a micro. So we thought it was better to group those in with a future project.
The former owner of Skylar paid for that road to be redone. It was before you were here, so it must have been about 8 years ago. So that's why it's in such good shape.
And there isn't much traffic on the birch extension.
No, it's a 10-home cul-de-sac. maybe. This is our table of running costs, in the listing of projects that we presented when the Measure B paving program was adopted by the city council. And so this is the tracking of how much we projected the projects were going to cost. That's what's in the pink column. And that's the 25.3 million was our initial estimate. And then the next column, the bold numbers are what we've actually spent to date. That's asphalt on the ground, and that's 18.3. And then the next column is work that's still underway. So that's the Route 4 streets that are going on right now. We've actually spent some of that 5.2, but that project is still underway. And so everything is now awarded. And so you see that last column there, that's the delta. So we're actually projecting that we'll underspend the 25.3 million by about 1.8 million. And like I said, everything has been awarded today. This is that 5.2 that's still left to be spent. All of these projects have been awarded except for the Piedmont retaining wall. That hasn't gone out to bid yet. But the engineer's estimate is 200,000. The pathway stairs on Elm, we're going to talk about that a little bit later in one of the other items. Measure B Group 4 has been awarded, it's underway, so that's what the contractor's bid was, the 4.1. The only thing that may make that cost go up a little bit is if we have any delay costs associated with the PG&E Street that I mentioned. The contractor's already told us he's good holding until August for the Owl Street, so we're not going to get, because that was actually in the contract documents, those dates. So he's fixed to that, and he's told us if he can come back in that same time frame and do Monte Vista, then he'll also honor his bid price. But if we don't make the August, September, we start getting into winter, it may be time to look at rebidding that one. Shinny Lane paving, that's also been awarded, also delayed because of the owls. And then the crosswalk enhancements, they're underway throughout town, so that's been awarded too. So the only one of these really that has the potential to go up as far as this 5.2 number changing is if there's any change orders on Group 4. And groups 1, 2, and 3 all came in at the end of the day under what the contract bid was. One of those reasons is we have an allowance in those contracts for if we come into soil under the street that's worse than our engineers anticipated, and there's an allowance for them having to dig the street down a little bit further. And in the first three projects, they haven't come close to using all that amount. So I don't anticipate that 4.1 would go up. So I think this bottom line number you see here, the 1.8 is a pretty good number. Now, again, that's under the 25.3. That was the Measure B plan estimate. I think the bond was for 25, so it's like 1.4 net. This is a little small, hard to read, but this is just a detail of the streets that haven't been paved yet. So these are the ones that letters have gone out for. The top ones, that's the South Alicio Corte Real. Those are being paved now. One of the issues is they can do some work in the rain, but you don't want to put your final lift of asphalt down in the rain because you won't be able to compact it properly. Same with temperature. It has to be 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And the temperature has to be rising at the time they put the final paving mat down. And that's just because the pavement, in order to last the 20 to 25 years, it needs to be compacted in place with the big rollers. And the asphalt needs to be at a certain temperature and won't compact properly. So if you're putting it down when it's cold and it's windy, there's a chance that even though you roll it, the asphalt will be too cold and it won't compact properly. It won't last as long. So that's the reason for the delays on South Alicio. And then the streets below it are all deferred because of the proximity to the nesting owls. And then your next column is the King of Monte Vista that are deferred because of PG&E. Redwood Highway has not been paved yet. We're going to pave that in conjunction with the next phase of the north-south Greenway. And then there's a little section of Bon Air Road that, depending on which map you look at, is either a county or city or half of one and half of the other. So it's a segment. It's a couple 100 feet in from Sir Francis Drake. It's the only section of Bon Air Road that hasn't been paved. And the mapping that we have suggests that the city owns the lanes going towards Sir Francis Drake and the county owns the lanes coming from Sir Francis Drake. So we're going to work with the county to get that last little segment. Either we'll pave it and charge them, or we've done that a number of times. College Avenue, the north end of College Avenue, is actually the same way. The city owns the lanes that head towards Kentfield, and then the county owns the lanes that come from Kentfield all the way down to College Court. And so we paved it, and then they paid us back for paving their half. So we'll probably have to do something similar with Bon Air.
The Bon Air Road it's pretty bad. That little section.
At that end, yeah, we're out there probably every other week putting cutback and like temporary asphalt in those potholes.
Any estimated, timeline? And here we have all this work that's done up to that spot.
Right.
So Francis Drake, and there's just this little spot that's a mess.
So our hope is that because we've now got this delay for when we're going to do the Owl Street, so we probably have our contractor under contract through the end of summer, that will give us time to work with the county and see if we can work up an agreement to get that added into their contract scope.
That would be good. I think
And that street was also pushed to the end because of the bridge project and the hospital. And then Post and Skylark. Post is the other street like Skylark. There doesn't actually. Post has been paved so many times by the water district over the last few years for the water main breaks they've had out there that there's nothing left for us to pave. So that's why we didn't have to pave that one. This is a snippet. This is the same one you saw last time. MTC publishes the pavement condition index once a year. And so I think I shared this with you last time because it came out in October, but this is what's out there in the public as far as the condition of streets. So at that time, our PCI was a 76. And again, when it gets reported out, they always report out a 3-year floating average. And so I think that says 67. That's what our PCI is reported at now as a 67 by MTC. But we have the same software they do, and we have updated it. And so we anticipate when that report comes out in October of next year, they'll report that our 22 PCI was, let's say 84. I didn't need glasses, but really. And then actually today with the streets that we paved since the end of the year, our PCI is 86. And so that leads into the next slide. And if you look at this, the top part of it has going back, 10 years, and you can see we were below 50. So we've come a long way, and you can see how steep the upper one gets as you get to the last few years when we've had the Measure B program. So what do those numbers mean? So they do get reported out by MTC for every municipality in the 9-county MTC area. And it's a rating of how good your street is from 0 to 100. But what those numbers do is they give you a guideline for what you need to do to maintain that street in good condition. And so anything higher than 80 is considered good. The average citizen would look at a road that was 80 or higher. I think this is a well-maintained street. As you drop down, the street conditions get worse, obviously. But there's some engineering in here where you get to a PCI below 70 is when you start getting into repair treatments and rehabilitation treatments that start to get a lot more costly. You're not just dealing with putting a new surface in the street, you're dealing with digging sections up and replacing them. So it's for economic reasons and also for having smooth roads, you want to keep your streets up in that very good rating, which is a little difficult to do because when your streets are that good, it's hard to do anything to them to make them much better. So usually what you're doing is getting them into the mid 70s and programming something where you can get them back up into the 80s in short order. So we have software that we've used before. Every municipality pretty much in the Bay Area uses a software. We go out and we rate the streets every year. We walk them, we look at the cracks, we look at the alligators, the alligator cracking. And then we assign that PCI number to the street, and then we plug it into the software and we tell them how much money we have, and it'll tell you which streets you should do. Conversely, you can tell that program, I don't want any of my streets to drop below 75. It will come out and tell you how much you need to spend in order to do that and tell you which streets to do. So plugging everything in, plugging in that we would finish all the Measure B streets. It shows us that we probably need about $1.2 million to pave the streets on an annual basis for the next 5 years. It really only goes out 5 years. You can do it for 10, but it's really only meaningful for the next 5 years. But you redo this every year, you would redo this and you get that number recalculated. And so when we talk about our annual street funding, the money that comes in that we consider local money, that's your gas tax, your SB1 gas tax. We have a vehicle impact fee in the city that we get money from the refuse company, and then also large construction projects pay a fee towards the city too. And then the congestion management agency, TAM, we get the measured AA sales tax on an annual basis too. If you add all those up, it fluctuates. Gas taxes kind of all over the place and has been trending down because of more fuel efficient vehicles and electric vehicles and things like that. But we're looking at about 1.6 million of what's coming in that's local money each year. So at the moment, it looks like we have our paving program for the next 5 years should be covered with the local funds, unless there's any big shift in funding or unless our streets start deteriorating worse than the software projects they will.
Joey,
Yes.
your year one projects, they're at 5 years now. Where do you anticipate TCI for those to be?
So for the first 10 years, they'll drop about, it's a curve, so they'll start to drop more over time, but most of the ones that we did 5 years ago are very high 80s or low 90s at the moment. So about 2 points a year. And then after that, it starts to be 3 points a year, and then 4. And then if you've seen the deterioration curve, the older the street gets, the faster it deteriorates. And so that's the impetus on doing more maintenance projects and getting these streets when they're 75s and 80s, because you can do crack sealing on them. You can do micro surfacing, which is a real thin layer of asphalt, and that helps preserve your street, and it basically bumps that curve back up because you're sealing the street so the moisture won't get back underneath it. Because the worst thing you can do to a street is leave it alone and you leave the cracks. Moisture gets into the road base through those cracks, and once the moisture gets in there, then the pavement rapidly starts to deteriorate and the cracks start to multiply and the cracks move closer and closer together, and then you end up with alligator cracking. And then your alligator cracks pop out and you get potholes. So
So this, the last two bullets mean that there's no need for Measure B funds in the future to pay for maintenance.
Well, so. The high price of gas is masking the fact that there's been a precipitous drop in transactions. So for the next 5 years, your statement's correct, but I think as the cost of maintenance goes up, it'll eventually outpace the gas tax situation, which we thought would actually be happening right about now, but because gas got so much more expensive, it's bought us a little more time. But eventually, I think Measure B will have to supplement the maintenance budget.
Oh, so the 1.6 million does not include Measure B funds.
It's a pot of, as Julian was saying, the gas tax and the vehicle impact fees that we collect.
But not Measure B.
In that, for the next 5 years, we don't think we need Measure B. So,
That's why we can move money over for G. In the future, are we bound forever to use our surplus for G? I mean, ultimately, if the roads start needing more money, will the district, I mean, will the city have to take that money and put it back into the roads?
So two things about it. One is B has its own breadth of allowable expenditures. So there's lots of things beyond the roads that were included with the anticipation that in years when there's surplus money, we'd be having these conversations with the council about what to do with the surplus money. The other thing is you have to remember that debt service has a lifespan. So ideally, we keep the program moving along till the debt service is paid off, and then we actually would see a pretty healthy amount of revenue every year, which would lead the community to two questions. Do we need this tax anymore, or do we want to pump it into infrastructure that qualify under the measure?
Was this number 5?
this was the update. This was number 4.
We're kind of transitioning
yeah.
toward 5. It's kind of,
Okay.
Yeah.
you know.
I think that was last
Why
slide.
don't we move into what?
Before we leave that, I have a couple of questions. Going back to the fund use tracking charts. I noticed that just looking at the pattern in the delta, by and large, the amounts spent were under the estimates, and then in group 4, then of course there was quite a reversal, and so that there was a lot more spent than estimated. Was that because of inflation, or because of project complications, or what?
That was because we had to defer some streets from the earlier projects and they got moved into group 4. So group 4 became a bigger project than what was in the original plan. And so that's why your group 1, 2, and 3 are under and your group 4 is over. Oil fluctuates all over the place, and it can fluctuate within 4 months more differently than it does 5 years when we look back, because we're actually per Caltrans, if the cost of oil moves too much, the contractor is entitled to recoup some of that cost. And fortunately, we haven't had that trigger on any of our projects, but it's kind of all over the place within a year. But it's actually, if you look at it over the 5 years, it hasn't been too different from group 1 to group 4, and that's your main cost is oil on all of these projects.
And then looking at the streets remaining to be paved chart, now that all of the streets there, except for Post and Skylark, are included in your fund use tracking,
Yes,
correct? That
Those
they're not.
numbers are all accounted for in there.
Okay, and then there's just one question about, I know you mentioned that Shady Lane is a concrete street and much more expensive to pave. Coleman Avenue also is a concrete street. And,
Yes.
or at least part of it is, at least the part is the Stradway stairs that I pass. Do you anticipate with Coleman, anything similar to Shady?
No, actually, there are a few, there were sections of Madrone that were concrete too, but they had asphalt over them, and that's what Coleman is for the most part. I think it was all concrete at some point, and some of it got overlaid with asphalt. But our consultant has looked at that, and he's recommended that we put asphalt back in there, and one of the reasons is because of all of the the tree roots and asphalt's a little bit more flexible than concrete, and some of the sections out there have buckled because they're concrete and the roots have moved them. And they're trees that we're not gonna take down, so the asphalt gives us a better opportunity to come in and do some repairs later on, whereas if we did concrete, you would end up with big sections of your street buckled with those roots. So that's why we've gone with asphalt on Coleman instead of concrete.
Oh, so Shady is actually being repaved as a concrete.
It'll be an 8-inch thick concrete street, much like a bus pad would be. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, move to 5.
Do you want to have more about transitioning to maintenance, or is that what your last slide was really about?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go into it in a whole lot of detail, like more available for questions if you have them, but what you're going to see is once our streets are all paved, I anticipate they'll all be above 75 in that first year. And we don't want to go and spend money grinding out decent asphalt to put in really good asphalt. That's not the best way to spend our money. So you're going to see crack sealing projects, which we really haven't done here. You're going to see microsurface and slurries, which are thin overlays. And then there will be a handful of streets that we will maybe wait 10, 15 years and we'll do smaller grind outs and replacement. But you're going to see pretty much all of the streets, having been paved within 5 years are pretty much going to all deteriorate somewhat at the same rate, even though, say, Magnolia gets a lot more traffic than a residential street. It was paved with a thicker section, and they're all paved to last a certain amount of time, 20 to 25 years. But the anticipation is typically on some of those streets, if you're going to go with more of a maintenance project, then you're doing a slurry or a micro or a thin overlay at about the 10 to 12 year mark is usually the sweet spot when you're trying to put another surface on the street, and you're not adding strength. You're just protecting what's below by making sure the water sheets off and gets into the storm drains. A lot of that maintenance work is very labor intensive, whereas the work that I mentioned before, the paving the streets, your biggest cost is your oil and your material. And it's a pretty standard operation with a paver and the crew that's out there. They've got it down to a science. And so it's very easy to predict what those costs will be because it's driven by how many tons of asphalt you put down. Maintenance work is a lot more maintenance intensive, like I said, and there's different opportunities for doing some work in-house. For example, we don't have, as our maintenance crew, we don't have crack sealing equipment. We don't even have a truck that we can get asphalt in. You've got to have a special bed in a truck to bring asphalt. So that's why when we do all of our patches right now, we do them with what's called a cold mix, which you can buy at Home Depot. And it's nowhere near as good as asphalt, but it costs 10 times as much as asphalt. And it's because you buy it on a small basis and you can put it in a pothole and it'll patch for a while. But it's not compatible with when you repave a street in the future. You have to dig that out, get rid of all of your temporary cold asphalt before you pave a street. So when we're starting to look at some of these maintenance projects moving forward, there may be an opportunity to do some of that work in-house, but it may mean an investment of some equipment that we don't have. But we're not quite at that point yet. We're going to work with our consultant and look and see what makes sense for doing some of the work in-house versus bringing in some of the contractors. The issue with the contractors is because it's a smaller amount of work, the crack sealing and the slurry seal, they need a big project to come in. Some of these companies that come in and they do slurry seals, they won't come here to do 3 or 4 streets because it takes them like a day to get set up and bring all their equipment in, and they're just doing a day of work. Then I mean, they would, but it would cost us a lot more than it should, and it's not economically feasible. So, even though we're going to be looking at as a pay as you go moving forward, it may be that we have to bunch 2 years worth of work together in one project just so that we get some economies of scale. And that might mean that we have some other stuff that needs to be done sooner or later that we, do internally, maybe so we don't have to bring a more expensive contractor in. But it's a very different game than what we looked at when we put the 5-year plan together. That was relatively easy because every street was just, what they were like before. So it's pretty easy to put a plan together to say how we were going to fix them all. There's a lot more options with the maintenance program, so you're probably gonna see, some more engineering costs. To make sure that we spend the money properly and that we maintain the investment that we just put in repaving all the streets.
Anything more on item 5? Okay, let's move to item 6. The use of Measure B funds for 23-24.
So, last year when we met with the committee, we discussed that it was time to look at the growing fund balance and. We talked about setting a reserve policy. So after that meeting, we crafted the policy that's in your packet that the council to provide some guidance for how to use excess revenue in Measure B once we're comfortable with taking care of the core needs within the fund. This is our first year to really talk about spending some of the fund balance that's built up. The policy calls for 2 considerations before we talk about doing extra projects. So first is, do we have the reserve that we established, which is $1 million? And the second is, does Public Works feel they need any money to supplement the road maintenance program? So we have $1 million in reserve, and Jillian informed me we don't need money for the maintenance program. So this is a unique situation because, as you know, we've been building this up and we haven't been spending it. And so I don't anticipate ever coming to you and saying we could spend this much money at once. I think in the future, it'll be more like $500,000 or 700,000, depending on how well sales tax is done, that we might be talking about in terms of excess projects. But for this year, we brought you some big ticket items, and Jillian, I provided a little bit of background, but Julian can go into detail about any of these projects. The only one I put in that isn't one of his projects is that back with Measure C and in the early days of Measure B, we were covering fire truck leases, which was helpful. And we actually right now are splitting leases with Corps Madera through Second Wind Fire. We have 2 We have 1 lease that's active now. We have 1 that kicks in later this calendar year, and the Larkspur share is 141,000 and change to contribute to those leases. So I would suggest that we relieve the general fund of that burden because it was clearly something that was contemplated for Measure B. And Julian can speak a little bit more about some of the needs on the public works projects.
Yeah, so we recently presented to City Council our update of our storm drain master plan, which we did a first phase of it a couple of years ago, where we looked at all the capacities of the pipes, the storm drain pipes throughout town. We just did a follow-up where we've done an evaluation of the condition of the pipes, and we drilled down a little bit more on our pump stations. So the city has 6 storm drain pump stations, and basically what they do is they take water that comes from some of the storm drains in some of the low areas of the city, and they pump them out to the creek so that the areas don't flood. With the exception of the Bon Air pump station, that's practically brand new, all of the other 5 pump stations are at the end of their useful life. They're constantly sources of maintenance call outs during storms. Like just this last week, we had to go and replace a pump at the Larkspur Plaza pump station, and it was the Redwood pump station a month before that. So we're always out there. It's old infrastructure. It's outdated. And there are a reliability issue when we have these storms, because as good as we can get the storm drains fixed up, if they go to a pump station that's not working, the water's just going to sit there and fill up the street where the pump station is. So we had our consultants look at the pump stations and kind of prioritize them. And as we were doing this, the consultant we're using is also working for Ross Valley Sanitary District. And he let us know that Ross Valley is actually looking at replacing their pump station at Heatherwood, which happens to be in the same building as the city's pump station in that area. It's the only place where it happens in the city, and it goes back to the days when the city owned both the sewer and the storm drains. We don't own the sewers anymore, but that joint pump station has never been fixed, and it's a problem for both of us. If they have an issue with their system and they back up, then it gets sewage directly into the storm drain and into the creek, which is not good. And if we have an issue with ours, it pumps more rainwater into their sewer system and it can overflow their treatment capacity if they're getting a lot of rainwater into their system. So we've talked with our consultant, we've talked with RVSD, and they think it makes good sense to do a joint project. Because their initial thought was they were just gonna take all of their stuff out of the old building and build a brand new pump station right next to the old one, which would basically double the footprint of what's out there in Heather Park. So we've talked with the opportunity to do a joint project. So we would use the same consultant who would design them both to work together. There's definitely some cost savings in the building and the electrical feed and things like that. And so the RVSD has it funded in their capital program to start the design this year and the construction next year. So we would like to start moving forward that as one of the first, of the 5 pump stations to get replaced. It's got a $1.9 million price tag, which there's no other funding for storm drain. Basically, your storm drain funding is the same as your streets as far as the state is concerned. When you get your gas tax, is to fix your streets, your pavement, your street lights, your traffic signals, all of that, and your storm drains is all one. It's that gas tax. That's the storm drain funding that we get. So there's nothing earmarked for this at the moment.
Is this station, is this the one behind Redwood?
No, well,
Or
it is behind Redwood, but far behind Redwood. There's another one that you can see at the court in front of Redwood or behind, whichever. I don't know which is the front of that.
behind the football field. You know,
That's this,
Back.
Yeah, it's at the corner of Diane and Midway, right next to Heather Park.
okay,
Yeah. It's the only one that's an actual building. I think it's a brick building.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
There's a bigger Redwood one on the other side of the high school. And then the next one is storm drain improvements. So as we've looked through our videos of our storm drain pipes, we've identified about 2 million of storm drain repairs that we said we'd like to get to in the first 2 years. These are ones where the camera went through the pipe and it could either see daylight above, or we had to stop the camera because it was going to fall through the bottom of the pipe into who knows what. So these are on our definitely do as soon as we can list. And so I think we've got about $1 million roughly left over from the American Rescue Plan Act that the first portion of that was assigned to storm drains. That contract's already under design. This is the next phase of storm drains that we think need to be fixed sooner rather than later. And so we're short about 500,000 based on what we think it'll take to fix those pipes. And so that's the second suggested pot of money here. And then Elm Street stairs is something that was, yes.
I think I asked you this once before, but you don't have to dig up Measure B streets in order to repair storm drains.
For the most part, no. Most of what we've seen is fixable by spot repairs, and then they're able to line the pipe from inside. So they basically it's a plastic liner with a resin on it that gets wheeled in throughout the pipe, and then it expands and then it cures in place, and it creates a thin plastic new pipe inside of the old pipe, and it's good for 50 years. It's better than the pipe that was there before. Yeah, there may be the odd place, but we haven't seen anything yet at any of our inspections. Most of the ones that are going to have to be dig ups are in behind houses and up in the Greenbrae Hill, not under the pavement. And then the Elm Street stairs, this was funded previously, and then when we did our design and did the cost estimate, we found out we didn't have enough money to do this project. And so if you're out on Palm Hill, there's already a set of there's some old pathways that were created when the subdivision was created that run kind of from the high street. It's kind of a switchback. Elm at the top, and then I think the next one down is Bayview, and there's a series of steps that take you from the lower street up to the higher street. Or there's a series of paths, I should say. The lower one from Bayview to Elm was improved with stairs that we got a federal grant for 10-15 years ago.
Those are the wooden stairs.
Yeah, wooden stairs.
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
10 years ago.
The upper section, once you get up to Elm and then you want to get to the next section of Elm, that's still a dirt path. I think there's a small section of stairs at the bottom, but the rest of it is all a dirt path. From what I've been told by the neighbors, it's unpassable in the winter when it's wet because it's mud and it's pretty steep. And so we hired a consultant to look at doing the design that we had from below. We initially estimated it was going to be a couple $100,000, and there is money in the budget for it. There is that 200,000 that we originally asked for, but now that we've got an engineer on board and he's looked at it. We wouldn't have been able to get all the way up to the top with the $200,000, and so we're about $200,000 short by the time we pay the consultants and do construction inspection and everything for getting the stairs to get from street to street and not only having to build 2/3 of it. So we'd really like to build the whole thing now. Because breaking some of these smaller projects up into smaller projects makes them really expensive, because you're paying a contractor to move in and do the work. It's a lot better if you can do it all at once rather than phasing these smaller projects out. So we think it would be money well spent to get that entire stretch fixed now under one project. So that's the Elm project.
So Julian, what would be number 5 on your list?
Number 5, it would probably either be the next segment of storm drains that we need to do, or starting doing some more engineering on the 4 remaining pump stations to see what kind of a project that would look like, because there is some pre-engineering that we could do for those projects.
I know that the Heatherwood has been a problem for literally decades. I mean, I can remember in the 60s. But I'm curious, you said that it would be bifurcated. Would there be still one building, or would there be 2 buildings? And do you anticipate that there might be an expansion in size that would lead to public controversy? I mean, I can remember public controversy about a sign.
Right.
Down on East Ward. So are we looking at a significant expansion of the building, one or both buildings, that could cause concern?
It would have been if Rust Valley had proceeded to do their own project, because they would have basically duplicated what's there and just abandoned their own facility inside the building. So it's going to be smaller than it would have been. From our preliminary conversations with the consultant with RVSD, they're leaning towards totally abandoning that building and building 2 smaller enclosures as opposed to full-on buildings. There's no requirement actually for there to be a building for the pump station. And so they're looking at having it out. Most of their other pump stations are actually outdoor too. All of the equipment is below ground, and then they have like a service hut for what they need. But there are issues with having the actual pump station, which is where all the bad water comes in and goes out, in the same enclosed spaces where all the electrical panels are. And so to build it that way now would mean a bigger building to meet all of the code requirements. So they're looking at actually building the pump station outside and having a little smaller building for all the controls and everything. So the outside still has a fence around it for sound control and things like that. My sense is you're probably going to end up with something close to what's there now. The only other thing that might make the footprint a little bit bigger is some of the code issues and some of the setbacks. For example, the sewer district has to have a generator with their pump station. We don't, but the sewer district has to have a pump station, has to have a generator for their operations. And there are new air quality setback and noise requirements for generators that may make that have a bigger footprint too than what's out there now. But we're just at the preliminary stages of what it would look like. And RVSD's first take of this was they just thought they were moving outside of the building. So now we're having a look, knowing that we both want to get out of the building and build something new.
And there'll be some significant neighborhood outreach, will there, so that people will not.
Sorry. Sure about
I could have said that better. No, we'll definitely have some help out, because I'm not sure what Ross Valley has already done. They already tell me that it's funded in their program, so I would assume there's been some sort of outreach, and that is one of the neighborhoods where in some of our bigger storms, you'll see rubber pipes out on the street because they're out there pumping out of that pump station because they can't keep up. So I'm quite sure they've had some extensive conversation with the neighbors about the historical issues they've had with that pump station. But so we'll work with them and let the neighborhood know what's coming in that project.
Any other comments on these recommendations?
On the fire truck leases. Of course, as you say, in Measure C, because at the time of Measure C, it went all to Larkspur because we hadn't yet had the central Marin, and now we have the central Marin. So I'm just wondering, can we fairly say that we have the same measure of benefit if we use it for central Marin as we would have had if it was solely ours?
Central Marin made a conscious decision not to think of its operations that way, and so about 90% of its budget is just split down the middle without getting too wrapped up in the size of the communities and the distribution of the population. So assets like this are treated as a 50-50 equal share, equal benefit, and we don't actually have a good methodology in place to figure out how else to think about it.
You can measure it by where you go, I recall.
That might not fare well for Larkspur because we have more apartment buildings than they do. It's a lot of medical calls.
Do you know if the fire trucks will fit, the proposed fire trucks will fit in the Larkspur state in the downtown station?
So one of these trucks we own, it's in service and it's at 16, it's at Greenbrae. And then the other one, I believe, is going to be stationed at 14, which is the Tamalpais.
So then neither one of them down here.
Well, right now they haven't told me that the apparatus that's there is at its end of life, so we haven't had to have that conversation. Remember, this station's smaller, so we do have to keep a different type of truck in there. So
That's why I wondered if any of them were any of these would fit in that station. And so
I think we purposely bought these two to give us more equipment. I mean, larger truck, more equipment. Frankly, the chief had his way. He's getting worried about height. So we don't have a place to park a ladder truck that he's getting a little worried about. They said Larkspur's in the surrounding area is going to start seeing more and more 3, 4, 5-story buildings. If we're going to need to figure out a way to park a truck that can have a more serious ladder on top.
so one goes in Greenbrae, and where would the other go?
I think they have that slated for the station on Tamalpais over here, the main Corte Madera one, which actually probably services Larkspur just as much as it does Corte Madera, because they do a lot of the responses out of there into the hills.
Okay, one more, go ahead.
So, not related to that, but in the Measure B leftover funds, is there any inklings of possibly using some of those funds for this building? We've talked about it in the past.
We don't actually know yet what it's going to cost to even do this building. We have an the estimates you've seen published, but until we have the design, which is probably a year and a half away, it's kind of tough. So you'd be sitting on that money for a while.
Yeah.
And
And put it to work.
as I told the council the other night, whatever options they pick for city offices, it's some combination of cash and debt service. And timing will be everything for what debt service options are out there and what the price tag actually is.
Let's have a motion to support the recommendations for Measure B funds. Moved
One second.
and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Opposed? Great, good job.
Oh, we got to a real vote, not a roll call vote.
Move along. So item seven. now that we're starting to meet in person, we're wondering whether people would be comfortable having the meeting start at 4 rather than 6. I'm sure
fine with
the staff would appreciate that.
We always meet on Mondays.
We can meet.
Your regular meetings are the first Monday of March and December.
Those are your two fixed meeting dates.
Because I'm perfectly happy if everybody else is perfectly happy doing it at 4. I think it makes it easier for everybody. So.
Yeah, I prefer that.
Sure.
You might get home before it's done.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Second thing I want to just point out, remind everybody, if you want a hard copy, Allison will print it off for you and give it to you. Some of this printers at home aren't as good as others, so just let her know. What else do I have on my list? Oh, the first picture that you did on your report, Julian, showing the striping. I know this is just personal editorial, but the striping that has been done in our project is so good and so visible and clear. And every time I drive on St. Francis Drake Boulevard, you cannot see the stripe. That's the worst striping I've ever seen on a road.
During the day or night?
Either
Oh,
one.
really?
It's just terrible. Just think about driving around Larkspur, you can see where all the lanes are, clear, bright white. You go on St. Francis Drake, you really can't see
Hopefully
it.
it's pretty good on the east side of St. Francis Drake, at the freeway, because that's nice.
So the lighting, they screwed up. The striping, they screwed up. I mean, the fencing, they screwed up.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so when is our next meeting moving on?
Your next standing meeting is the first Monday of December. As we start to finalize the storm drain reports for the council, we'll reach out if the committee wanted a presentation. Or we can at least make sure you know it's going to council.
So we're gonna get a good sound and light production on sewers.
Like I said, we've got videos. So if you want to watch hours and hours of this little robot traveling, it's not else.
Background music in the video.
If we choose the ones of
If for
interest.
If for some reason we're not here, but we want to participate, can we jump on a Zoom? Would that work or no?
So I'm glad you asked that because I hadn't thought about putting that on the agenda. So the rule is to formally vote, you would have to tell us in advance you couldn't make it so we could publish where you're going to be.
Okay.
If you want to just join us and not be voting that evening, you can just jump on and do that.
Okay.
So because with a committee like this, I could see that happening, and you know, most of what you do is by consensus anyway. So
Yeah.
Aren't the new rules a little different? Because before I used to travel. And all I had to do is put a sign on my door. I could be anywhere, but now you have to be within the jurisdiction. Right?
So there's two sets of rules, and I'm trying not to confuse people with the complicated new set, which is what you're referring to. So the old set still works, which is where you would post, I'm officially voting from my house or my office, and we would publish that's where you are. That still works. And I'm just advising most folks, that's the way it is. And then if you have something weird happen, give us a call and Allison will explain the really weird new rules to you that are very difficult to take advantage of. So that's my 2 cents. I hope they change it at some point and see the light.
So this is the time for the public to comment. Do we have any online public out there?
You do have an attendee on Zoom that we could ask if to raise their hand if they have any public comment. I don't see them raising their hand.
Oh, you know,
Oh.
Stand with them, you got your back.
so it is time for.
Actually, did raise your hand.
Did raise it.
Yeah.
Kevin Carroll of Larkspur, and I must say I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. And also, it's also open time for committee. Anybody else has something to say?
I did, on the balance sheet, turning to the balance sheet, which was the last line, Dan, could you refresh our recollection for the meaning of the equity entry? I understand the assets and the liability there are now, but I forgot about equity.
The equity is essentially the fund balance. I think they use the label equity because we run a treasury or a pooled cash system. And so it's this fund share of that pool. And so it is, I think, I see Tamara's nodding her head, she's an accountant, but I think that's the logic behind term equity is it's a share in a pool.
It's
But-
not- Well,
Because it differs from assets.
It's revenue
Okay.
and expenses. So if you look at it, you have to look at it as assets plus liability equals liability plus equity. And the equity includes your revenues over expenses, so that 5.4 plus the 9,288, it's the 6.7 million that's in the assets.
James, think of that extra amount as being, think of the extra amount as being our running total for any surpluses or deficits that have been running during the year. Because the timing of the projects don't always occur in sync with fiscal year.
Thanks.
That's why he's got that plus and minus thing underneath.
Kathy, not me.
Yeah.
Kathy.
Yeah.
if no one else, we can adjourn the meeting.
I'm up to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Meeting is adjourned.